Welcome to the deep dive. If you're like most people, you've probably picked a side, Coke or Pepsi. But beneath the surface of that choice lies, well, one of the most brilliant, high-stakes, and frankly bizarre rivalries in economic history. So today we are diving into the ultimate, longest-running battle, the Cola Wars.
And this deep dive, it really shows us that this is so much more than just a fight over shelf space or, flavor. It's a century-long struggle. It spans economics, culture, and some pretty profound human psychology. The battlefield isn't the grocery aisle at all. It's the human mind.
Okay, let's unpack that. We're talking about a conflict where the main weapons are sugar, tradition, and incredibly aggressive propaganda. Advertising, really. It's just a testament to the power of branding.
And the roots are deep, of course. Coca-Cola, it's the older, more established sibling, founded in 1886. Pepsi, which actually started as Brad's drink, followed not long after in 1893. But while those origins are there, the sources agree the competition was pretty quiet for a while, until, that is, a massive societal upheaval forced them to really define their differences. Starkly.
So here's our mission for you today. We're going to unpack the three main strategic fronts of this war. We're talking everything from literal price tactics to culture wars and psychological attacks. But we're also going to reveal the truly stunning history, a history of Cold War diplomacy and, believe it or not, naval feats that almost nobody knows about. And by the end, we'll analyze who, if anyone, actually won.
Right. To really understand the war, you have to get the timing. Historians generally agree the true Cold War kicked off in the 1930s. And that date is critical because it's right after the economic devastation of the Great Depression, a time when American consumers were watching every single nickel.
And this is where that first huge strategic divide opens up. America was core. But Coca-Cola, they were resting on their position as the ultimate reliable staple.
Yeah.
They maintained a fixed strategy. They just insisted on selling their small bottle for 5 cents, a nickel, the price they'd held for decades. They were betting on stability, on tradition.
And Pepsi saw the vulnerability right there in that so-called stability. Coca-Cola's rigidity, while it projected permanence, it left them wide open to attack. So Pepsi's countermove was brilliant, and it was purely tactical. They offered twice the volume for the exact same price. It was a strategy based on simple, undeniable math for the consumer.
And the source material highlights that iconic 1930s slogan that really launched the conflict, twice as much for a nickel. That is such a direct, aggressive challenge. It immediately reframes the whole conversation. It's not, do you want a cola anymore? It's, do you want value?
No, it was incredibly effective. If we step back and analyze the long-term impact, this wasn't a war of recipes at this point. It was a war of perception. An algazavashi, as the sources call it, Pepsi immediately positioned itself as the choice of the people, the value brand that got the average person's struggle, and they saw real growth during that crisis.
Okay, so when Pepsi makes this populist challenge, how did Coca-Cola respond? Did they try to lower their price or match the size?
Absolutely not. They just doubled down. They refused to budge on the nickel bottle. They saw it as a pillar of their identity. Coca-Cola just leveraged its established position to represent tradition, stability, American permanence. They were willing to sacrifice short-term volume to maintain that high-ground cultural position. It forced consumers to ask a question. Is this about need and value, which is Pepsi, or is it about comfort and continuity, which is Coke?
So this first round really sets the stage for everything that follows. Pepsi establishes itself as the nimble, aggressive challenger, always ready to innovate, while Coke cements its role as the immovable establishment, the symbol of the way things should be.
Exactly. This price battle defined their brand personalities for the next 100 years. But the moment the economy recovered, the battle had to shift, because value wasn't the main concern anymore.
Right, which brings us to the next phase. The sources all agree the period from the 60s to the 80s. Those were the most critical years. The battlefield shifted completely from how much you got for your money to who was drinking it. It became a war for the next generation.
And this is where Pepsi executed a truly critical long-term pivot. They decided to focus almost exclusively on the new generation. They knew they couldn't beat Coke on tradition, so they just decided tradition was irrelevant. Old news. They tried to redefine the cultural relevance of soft drinks entirely.
So that meant getting rid of that Depression-era, value brand image and becoming aspirational, right? You had to be seen drinking it.
Precisely. Pepsi's new identity was young, modern, a little bit rebellious, and just deeply integrated with pop culture. They got that youth identity requires constant motion, constant updates. And I mean, look at their roster. They were always signing the hottest faces of the moment. Michael Jackson, Madonna, Britney Spears, and then later Beyonce. They captured the spirit of the cutting edge.
And Coke had to defend against this cultural onslaught. If Pepsi's the drink of the new modern moment, what was Coke offering?
They just went back to that deep well they'd established in the 30s. They countered by focusing on nostalgia, family, tradition. They cemented these enduring icons like their version of Santa Claus and themes of general happiness, which is a much softer, more timeless message than Pepsi's constant push for the next generation. If Pepsi was always chasing the future, Coke was owning the global memory.
So the sources show this really clear contrast then. Pepsi was the drink you were excited about now. Coke was the drink you remember fondly from being a kid.
That's a perfect summary. Pepsi absolutely won the perception of youth and cultural relevance, no question. They were the dynamic choice. But Coca-Cola successfully maintained control of the overall general market. Their connection to tradition and memory, it was just strong enough to keep them dominant globally, even if their ads looked a little less trendy.
Okay, so the culture war then demanded some kind of proof, right? A tool to show that this youth preference wasn't just image. And that led directly to the most famous tactical blow in the whole rivalry, the Pepsi Challenge.
Yep, 1975. Pepsi starts doing these blind taste tests in malls. And the results were consistent. Most people, when they were blindfolded, they chose Pepsi over Coke. The test was so simple, and that's what made the results so persuasive to the public.
So this raises the big question. Why did Pepsi keep winning? What was going on there scientifically?
The sources all confirm the reason is rooted in flavor chemistry and the psychology of the first sip. Pepsi is formulated to be slightly sweeter and slightly less acidic than Coke. So when you're just taking one sip, that higher sugar load with lower acidity, it delivers a quicker, more intense, and immediately pleasurable flavor burst.
Can we get more specific on the recipe differences? I mean, beyond just sweeter, what notes are we talking about?
Well, the formulations are obviously top secret, but the analyses we have show that Pepsi has more pronounced notes of vanilla, lemon, and general citrus. Coke, on the other hand, relies more on its unique spice blend and a higher level of phosphoric acid. And that higher acidity in Coke, it balances the sweetness perfectly for long-term drinking. It feels crisp, clean, refreshing.
Which means the very thing that makes Pepsi win the first sip, that intense flavor burst, is actually its weakness when you drink a whole can.
Exactly. That intensity, that initial advantage, can quickly make the drink feel kind of heavy or cloying when you drink a lot of it. The sources explain it this way. Pepsi won the moment of the test, but Coke retained the satisfaction of the long haul.
But the public success of the Pepsi Challenge caused this massive panic at Coca-Cola, and that led directly to the huge, short-lived New Coke disaster of 1985. They really believed they were losing the taste war and trying to change their core product.
And what's so fascinating is the aftermath. Coca-Cola replaced their original formula with a product that was, ironically, formulated to taste more like Pepsi, sweeter, less acidic. And the consumer backlash was immediate. It was overwhelming, and it was emotional.
Why so emotional, though? Was it really just about the taste?
Not at all. The sources are clear on this. The anger wasn't about New Coke tasting bad, though a lot of people did dislike it. It was about betrayal. People saw the original formula as an unchangeable institution, a piece of the cultural fabric. So when Coke brought back the classic formula after just 79 days, they solidified something way more valuable than any ad campaign could buy.
They turned their biggest strategic mistake into an even deeper emotional connection. They basically reinforced their identity as the stable, irreplaceable symbol of tradition.
Precisely. So while Pepsi got a clear tactical victory with the taste test, the strategic consequence was that Coca-Cola ultimately grew even stronger in the long term. They leveraged that connection to memory and identity. It proved that Coke wasn't just a drink, it was a cultural promise.
So we've covered price, culture, and psychology in the U.S. But the strategy didn't stop at American malls. To understand the true global reach of this rivalry, we have to look behind the Iron Curtain. And this is where the story pivots from marketing to actual geopolitics.
This is the surprising twist. It adds this incredible dimension to the Cola Wars. While Coca-Cola was operating as the dominant symbol of the U.S. West during the Cold War, a symbol of capitalism and freedom, Pepsi was making these highly unorthodox moves to get into the restricted Soviet sphere.
So in 1972, Pepsi becomes the first American product to officially enter the Soviet Union. I mean, that is a massive diplomatic and commercial breakthrough right in the middle of a tense geopolitical standoff.
It was revolutionary. But it created this enormous logistical problem. The Soviet ruble, it wasn't internationally convertible. You couldn't use it anywhere else, so Pepsi couldn't take cash. They were forced into a massive barter deal. At first, they agreed to take payment entirely in Soviet goods, specifically Stolichnaya vodka, which they then sold in the West.
Vodka for cola syrup. Okay, that's already a high-stakes barter. But the sources say the trade expanded into something just astounding when the vodka wasn't enough to cover the demand for Pepsi.
Correct. The need for payment eventually led to them acquiring physical assets. Because Pepsi had leveraged its position as this unique, unofficial diplomatic channel, the USSR offered a stunning alternative: military hardware.
Wait, hold on. So we have a soft drink company temporarily owning military assets, like from a superpower. How did the sources frame the political risk of that, of blurring those lines?
It was a necessary blurring, really, driven by the fact that you just couldn't use normal money. And the stunning detail is this. Pepsi received old Soviet warships, a cruiser, a destroyer, and eventually a whole fleet of submarines as payment. According to Cold War trade archives, for a brief period in 1989, Pepsi was reported to own the sixth largest naval fleet in the world.
The head of Pepsi joked that he was disarming the Soviet Union faster than the U.S. military, that is. There's less commerce and more high-stakes corporate diplomacy.
It absolutely was. The sources detail this secondary, crucial function of Pepsi during the Cold War. Because they were trusted enough for these massive trades, some Pepsi executives were used as unofficial intermediaries, as diplomatic channels where formal government talks had stalled. In some regions, Pepsi was a quiet tool of diplomacy far more than just a seller of drinks.
So how did Coke eventually counter this? They couldn't top submarines.
They didn't have to. Coca-Cola's strength was its consistent, powerful symbolism. While Pepsi was navigating the complex logistics of bartering warships, Coca-Cola was just functioning as the dominant, straightforward cultural symbol of the U.S. It was the visual of Western soft power everywhere else in the world, instantly recognizable, consistent, and globally aspirational. They won the symbolic battle long before Pepsi could even convert its naval fleet into cash.
So after covering price wars, culture clashes, psychological tests, and literal submarines, we have to ask the final question. Who won the Cola Wars?
If we connect all this, the answer has to be nuanced. This war has never had a clear surrender. We have to look at the scorecard on the different fronts.
Okay, so give us the breakdown. What's the final score based on the source material?
Economically, you have to say Coca-Cola won. They still have the larger global market share, the better distribution network, and critically, the higher brand valuation. Geopolitically, while Pepsi had that spectacular Soviet moment, Coca-Cola won out as the consistent, powerful symbol of U.S. soft power over the long haul.
And culturally, the battle for the mind.
That's a perpetual draw. It's defined by their opposing identities. Pepsi dominates the moment. Its speed, intelligence, the current pulse of pop culture. But Coke dominates the memory. Its tradition, loyalty, its status as a global icon. The reliable choice.
So they forced each other to become these highly specialized, incredibly aggressive marketing machines. It seems like the core takeaway is that the rivalry itself is the most powerful engine for both of them.
Exactly. The ultimate winners of this never-ending rivalry are not one single brand. The winners are modern advertising, the sophisticated engineering of deep brand dependency and loyalty, and, well, perhaps regrettably, the massive, expanding, sugary drink economy itself. They wrote the playbook for how corporations fight for your loyalty.
What really stands out to me is that fundamental distinction between the first sip and that long-term emotional connection. If the Pepsi Challenge is a tactical win based purely on that initial, more intense sweetness, the moment, what does that say about the psychological power of marketing over sustained long-term satisfaction? The human body, after all, adapts to that sweetness. Does the fact that they're locked in this balance, this battle of memory versus moment, mean the war can never truly end, but must instead just continue forever, perpetually driving innovation for you, the consumer, something for you to consider the next time you open a can?